Okay guys, so welcome to the cast battle rematch between the all-conquering 22 Shimano Aldebaran BFS versus the mysterious Daiwa Gekkabijin Air TW PE Special. Now the reason I'm doing this cast battle rematch requires a little backstory on the Gekkabijin. Now I think it's been well over a year since I did the unboxing and analysis video of the Gekkabijin. But after that unboxing video, the reel just sat around for months until it finally saw some action where it secretly participated in the cast battle between the 16 Aldebaran BFS and the Alphas Air TW. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the results up on the screen for you guys, and you can see that the Gekkabijin was thoroughly beaten by both reels, especially that 16 Aldebaran BFS when casting a 1/8 ounce jerkbait and a 1/16 ounce mini crankbait. I mean, it wasn't even close. You can see the Aldebaran dominated the Gekkabijin by over 20 feet when it comes to the 1/8 ounce jerkbait. The Alphas beat it by over 10 feet, and even with that small micro 1/16 ounce crankbait, the Aldebaran outpaced the Gekkabijin by like 10 feet, while the Alphas outpaced it by like 5 feet. So needless to say, I was really disappointed considering the cost of this reel and the fact that this is supposed to be Daiwa's longest casting bait finesse reel. Now after thinking about those results, I realized that I probably needed to fish the Gekkabijin and do a lot of casting to get the bearings, I guess, broken in and seated properly before it went into battle. So that's what I did. I took the Gekkabijin out fishing that whole winter and into the spring, and then after that the Gekkabijin had its chance at redemption as it participated in the massive 14 reel bait finesse Olympics I did earlier this year. Now unfortunately things didn't go so well for the Gekkabijin because out of 14 reels it could only manage 11th place, while the 22 Aldebaran took the overall win. Now if you watch that video you'll know why, but if you haven't, the reason was that while casting this lure right here, which is a 3.8 gram little micro jerkbait, the Gekkabijin didn't have enough line capacity and casted off all its 4-pound mono easily. So since it was hampered by its low line capacity, when it came down to casting this lure, the Gekkabijin came in last place, while the Aldebaran managed second place. But when it came to casting this lure, which is the 1/16 ounce little mini crankbait, the Gekkabijin actually had the longest overall cast, but when it came to overall cast average, it was just barely beaten out by the 22 Aldebaran. It was very close between them. So after those results, I told myself this winter I'm going to do a rematch between these two reels, but we're going to give the Gekkabijin the advantage because in this cast battle we're going to be using BRAID. This is the line that the Gekkabijin was designed to use. Now the line I'm going to use is 6-pound, I guess 2-gauge braid, and we're going to be casting super ultralight lures, and let me show you those lures right now. Now the first lure is this Euro Tackle Z Spender suspending jerkbait, and without its hooks it weighed just under 3 grams, so not even 1/8 of an ounce. So with the snap swivel I was using, you're looking at right at about 3 grams total for this lure. Then we are dipping into the super ultralight stuff because we're going to be throwing this little even smaller micro crankbait, and it weighs 1.2 grams without its hook. So you're looking at just under 1.5 grams with that snap swivel I used. So super ultralight stuff, and I should have plenty of line capacity since I'm going to be using BRAID. So both reels are spooled up and ready to go, but before we go out to the casting field, let's do a little bit of a deep dive into the spools, because when you're casting these ultralight lures, spool weight definitely matters. Now when both spools are empty and their bearings removed, the Aldebaran holds about a 1 gram advantage over the Gekkabijin. So about 5.75 grams for the Aldebaran and about 6.78 grams for the Gekkabijin. And that seems to hold true even when filled with line, even though the Gekkabijin holds a lot less line than the Aldebaran, as you can see by the pictures I took of both spools on the scale. But here's the thing, the Gekkabijin has a much heavier and bigger bearing than the Aldebaran, coming in at a whopping 1.87 grams, while the micro bearing on the Aldebaran comes in at 0.75 of a gram. So when you remove those bearings, the Gekkabijin actually holds about a tenth of a gram advantage over the Aldebaran when filled with line, coming in at about 7.55 grams, while the Aldebaran, you're looking at about 7.65 grams. And of course, that's all due to the way the Gekkabijin spool is. As you can see, they narrowed the channel where the line lays. And just as I showed you guys before, the line lay on the Gekkabijin is pretty horrible. As you can see, there's a big concave section in the middle, and this is pretty common with all Gekkabijins, not just mine. And I suspect that's due to the way Daiwa set up the worm gear for using braid, because they didn't want the thin braid to dig into itself. But anyway, let's get out onto the field and do battle. Okay, so before we get to the results of the 3 gram jerkbait, let's go over a couple of things real quick. Now, the first thing is that the rod I used for both reels was the Major Craft Corza 6'5" 2-piece ultralight JDM bait finesse bass rod with a lure rating of 1/32 of an ounce to 1/4 of an ounce. Now, the second thing is, right now at Digitaka, both of these reels are priced within $2 of each other. And in fact, on most JDM sites, they're pretty comparable in price. So if you are someone who is trying to decide on which one of these reels to get, I recommend that you watch till the very end before you make your decision. So with that being said, let's get to the results of the 3 gram jerkbait. And as you can see, the Aldebaran took a clear and easy win with an average of 81.14 feet, while the Gekkabijin could only manage 68.25 feet. So that's a 12.89 foot advantage for the Aldebaran. And in bait finesse, that's significant. Now, the brake setting was as follows for both reels. The Aldebaran was set to about 4.8 on its external dial, spool tension set to just minimize side-to-side play, and then I backed it off just a little bit. Now with the Gekkabijin, I had to set the brake dial to 8 in order to get consistent clean casts, and of course the zero adjuster was set like it was from the factory, where there is just a small bit of side-to-side play in the spool. So with that being said, let's show you the results of this 1.2 gram micro crankbait. Okay, so without further ado, let me flash the numbers for this 1.2 gram crankbait. And once again, the 22 Aldebaran took a decisive win with an average of 63.7 feet, while the Gekkabijin could manage only 59.62 feet. So almost 20 yards average for the Gekkabijin. And with this small 1.2 gram lure, the gap between them shrunk down to only about 4.08 feet. Advantage for the Aldebaran. Now, despite the Gekkabijin having a braid-tuned air rotor, I still think that the Aldebaran's brakes are less restrictive. It's probably what led to its victory in this battle. Now, the brake setting for the Gekkabijin, I was able to go down to 7 on the external dial, while on the Aldebaran I actually had to turn up the brakes just slightly to about number 5. So there we go, guys, another clear and decisive victory for the 22 Aldebaran. But hold on just one second. Now, I was really disappointed in the cast numbers for the Gekkabijin on this 3 gram lure. So what I decided to do was I decided to do 5 more casts with the Gekkabijin, but I lowered the brakes down 1 click to number 7. And let me show you what happened. Okay, so with the brakes turned down to 7 on the Gekkabijin, it averaged 78.69 feet. So over 10 foot more than with the brakes set to 8. And of course, much closer to the Aldebaran, trailing behind by an average of only 2.45 feet, so less than a yard. So it's still a victory for the Aldebaran, but let me tell you what I had to do to get that extra 10 foot on the Gekkabijin. So in order to get those extra 10 feet of casting distance for the Gekkabijin, obviously the first step was turning the brakes down to number 7, and then I had to focus on doing line drive casts with the flatter trajectory. So how I did that was I aimed on a green clump of grass that was probably about 100 feet away, and I had to be really careful with my wrist snap at the end of the cast. It had to be a little bit more fluid than I could get away with the Aldebaran. So as you can see, by doing that, I was able to increase casting distance by over 10 feet and get very close to that 22 Aldebaran. But there's a caveat to that, and that caveat is that to get those 5 clean casts on brake setting 7, I had to cast this reel about 25 times. So for every successful clean cast, there was about 4 casts that blew up. And like I said, I really had to concentrate on getting a slightly smoother wrist snap at the end in order to get that jerkbait to fly cleanly through the air. So it is possible for this Gekkabijin to come close to the Aldebaran in casting, but you probably have to be a pretty experienced BFS angler to do so. So there we go, guys. You can see that even using the line that the Gekkabijin was designed for, the 22 Aldebaran still is the better bait finesse caster. And to end this video off, I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys that the only advantage I see for the Gekkabijin is in its looks, and it palms just a little bit smaller. Everything else, the Aldebaran is clear head and shoulders above, and not only just casting either. The Aldebaran is smoother, more refined, has tighter tolerances, and it's just on another level when it comes to casting smoothness. Now my Gekkabijin somehow turned into a really loud caster, and it's got to be the bearings. Now with this Aldebaran, it casts like the spool is just floating in mid-air. That's the best way I can describe it. So if you're looking for ultimate performance, the obvious choice is going to be this 22 Shimano Aldebaran BFS. Alright guys, thanks a lot.